In order to impale and devalue my heavy critique of disgustingly cliche and stagnant works, largely anime and games, my detractors will use like a super move the phrase, "nothing under the sun is new," in order to justify these works, which are replete with creativity. It aims to put any and every work of fiction on the same level of low tier garbage. It bothers me, as a creator of many things, the idea that nothing I create is original or unique. It disturbs me to my core. When I went to college, there was an assignment we had. It was to create a character for a 3D animated video. We were told to gather references for our art. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a requirement. We then had to present the references we used in the creation of our character. I imagine he said something similar at the time about how copying and stealing are the essence of art. But are using references for creation copying or stealing? The answer is no. Having inspiration and using themes from something to create new work makes it original. It also depends on the degree. I'm sure that was the inspiration behind the copyright law. The core of the copyright exception, fair use, is to say that you utilize someone else's work, but it is considered original if it is changed enough to the point that it no longer is a substitute for the original, and that the new work adds enough to it to the point where it is a meaningful difference from the original, thus creating a separate entity. I wholly agree to this sentiment. I still have to stress, though, low effort inspirations versus high effort ones. The new work should resemble the prior one as little as possible. I hate things that are cliche, mindless copies, recycled themes, tropes, and story elements with minimal effort. However, the argument that I hear so often, "nothing is new under the sun," bothers me even more, so much to the point that I will temporarily contradict myself. That is a Yoshimitsu style technique. Nothing is new under the sun. I counter. Everything is new under the sun. This is where Sailor Moon redraw comes into question. I wish I could say I had extensive knowledge of Sailor Moon to give a brief background on it. I know it's a cult classic, but as being a very shoujo anime, it's hard for me to get into, but I can respect one of the original Henshi. Anyway, the Sailor Moon redraw has a different artist. Many of the mainstream mangaka Humst draw Sailor Moon in their own style. The interesting part is that even though the goal is to redraw Sailor Moon, they do it in their own style. Arguably, some of them could get closer to the original if they really wanted to. My point is that even though they are recreating a scene, the differences in how they articulate the line and colors make it an original work. Most non-professionals who would attempt to redraw that scene are much more likely to not be able to reproduce it even if they tried. Everyone has their own unique style, just like a fingerprint. And reproducing something line for line still yields a different result in most cases. Simply put, I don't hate redraws. Sailor Moon is also one of the main inspirations for the modern day magical girl revival that happened during its era, including their transformations. But what separates the thing I hate and the thing I love, while not a violation of fair use, 10IQ anime that while use different art, characters, names, locations, etc., still have a very similar storytelling structure, borderline identical. There isn't anything particularly unique about the plot itself. An animated story is a different medium than a still image, and it relies on more than just the look of it to yield a worthwhile experience. I'm not done yet. There are parallels that can be drawn, though, no pun intended. The structure and plot are similar to the different line work and articulation of the still drawing. It's a lot easier to write a similar plot, though. The shonen genre is filled to the brim with these kinds of things. Average guy, girl falls out of the sky, changes guy's world, guy becomes hero, gets powers, girl gets kidnapped, guy saves girl, girl falls in love with guy, Guy beats bad guys harder than I beat my meat, usually involving some deus ex machina, which massively spikes the guy's power who shouldn't normally be able to beat the big bad, and saves the world. As stated before, my issue isn't the idea that there's no trope or similarity in one author's work with other works. It's how closely the author's work follows the structure. It's okay to have some tropes sometimes, depending on how overplayed the trope is at the time, but what really matters is how much nuance there is to the story. A good author could even use the boring skeleton of a genre to trick the viewer that one thing is going to happen and create a twist or subversion that would dramatically increase the appeal of the work. Madoka Magica, for example. Well, Madoka Magica has a lot of the staples of a magical girl genre, like Sailor Moon. Probably the twists put the show on a different level, and it is perhaps because of the expectation that the pre existing magical girl anime set that makes Madoka so great. In other words, like Soulbender, shows like Madoka Magica bend the tropes to their will for their benefit, similar to Hunter x Hunter. What is a magical girl, though? Based on my pre existing knowledge, a magical girl series usually contains a few of these staples. I'll list a few while browsing through TV tropes. We have Action Girl calling your attacks, Butterfly of Transformation, The Chosen One, Frills of Justice, Frilly Upgrade, Henshin Hero, Magic Wand, Magical Incantation, and Monster of the Week. Interestingly, though, one could use all of these tropes and still create one work that would be completely different from another. To my dismay, I accidentally did some research, and it turns out that Sailor Moon isn't the first magical girl anime, but it is something like one of the first mainstream magical girl warrior type animes, which is actually a subtrope of magical girl. In other words, it is codified. Down into the rabbit's hole we go. According to TV tropes, a favorite of mine, Sailor Moon inspired around three different subgenres itself. One being a revival and reimagining of older genres, repurposed with a more modern style. This is often a coming of age story featuring a girl with magical powers who sometimes gets into mischief and eventually saves the day. Not the very first in the genre, but this subgenre of magical girl warrior was mainstreamed and popularized through Cardcaptor Sakura, which I must add is one of the most popular magical girl series. It seems Magical Do-Re-Mi also fits into this category. I actually enjoyed this one as a pup. It's one of the few magical girl shows I've seen. There's the action hero Magical Girl, which was apparently created by Pretty Cure, but popularized and mainstreamified by Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha. It features the transformation-based magical girls with heavy amounts of action set to rival shonen genres. It also seems there tends to be fan service. Kill la Kill presumably fits into this category, but what do I know? Finally, we have Deconstructive, which tends to take a close look at the philosophy and themes of what it means to be a magical girl and their psychology. They tend to be wildly different and shed new light or dark on magical girls in ways that a newcomer to the genre might not expect. Madoka Magica leads the pack. While I don't wish to venture too deep into the rabbit's hole, I feel I cannot not mention the beginning. Interestingly, the magical girl genre was inspired by the magical girlfriend genre. Fujio Akatsuka is the creator of one of the very first magical girl anime in the sacred year of 1969. He said that his work, Himitsu no Ako-chan, was inspired by the Western live-action sitcom Bewitched. Now let us crawl out of this place. In a technical sense, Sailor Moon can be linked to Bewitched, but aren't there many differences between the two? There are also differences between Sailor Moon and the variety of magical girl anime and subgenre out there. Similarities exist as well, and some may be more similar than others, but that alone isn't a death sentence. The degree of similarity isn't the problem, but similarity alone isn't enough to kill. For a drawing, a redraw will look similar and different at the same time. An unoriginal anime will look different, but at its core it's the same. This type of anime is trash. Moral of the story, don't watch Fairy Fail. And yes, I know, if I keep going for low-hanging fruit, people will start to think I'm gay.